Hello everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and what we have in front of you today is Batman Gotham City Chronicles. This is a production and a half. This thing really is impressive. The box cover art alone is gorgeous across the two core boxes for the game. This was delivered as part of the original Kickstarter, and there has recently been a second season which adds even more content, and there was even more content in the first season that I'm not going to show through unboxings here on the channel, but I do want to show you at least the core experiences. Now, this game's played in a one versus many fashion. There is the ability within this particular game to play it versus mode, or one versus one. So you might be wondering, why am I showing this game in an unboxing on a solo specific channel? Well, not only do I appreciate and focus my efforts on showing you guys solo modes that are official, I also highly respect and admire individuals, especially fans like you guys, that go out of your way to turn a game that's not officially solo into a soloable game. So the individual who's done this, I don't know their name personally, but they might come out of the woodwork and make a comment on the video, and that would be fantastic. Or I might be contacting them through Board Game Geek to thank them as well after this video. But first off, the username from Board Game Geek is JK777, and you're not going to have a hard time finding this individual, because this individual's variant for solo rules and the cards created are the top download in the Batman Gotham City Chronicles files section on Board Game Geek. This is the top downloaded file in general. So there is a lot of people that wanted to see a solo variant for this particular game. It seems like that has been done. So I'm showing Gotham City Chronicles here on the channel to help you see what's inside the game, but also bring to light this solo variant for this particular game. So we're going to focus on each of these two core boxes and go into them one by one. So let's get started. We'll start off with the Heroes core box, which is pretty obvious based on the artwork on the front, which is absolutely fantastic. We'll also flip this box over, take a look at the back. The back of the box is pretty self-explanatory, really just showing the number of components of each type, and they're all listed right here in front of you. Also mentions how many players, but we do know that that unofficial solo variant is on Board Game Geek, allowing for single player play, which is pretty awesome. 90 minutes to play, and it says 14 plus. The very first thing you're going to run into when you open up the box is fantastic artwork, of course. As you saw on the front cover, this is not a surprise. There's actually an art print inside of the box for purchasers of this product. So this thing is absolutely gorgeous, and of course you could frame it if you love Batman, or just keep it in the box, but either way this looks phenomenal. And after you get past that artwork, we run into the books that come inside the game. This is going to include the missions booklet as well as the rule book. So we're going to start things off with the rule book itself. We'll find out how many pages are inside this thing. So we have a total of 59 pages, not including the back side of this book, and you can see the artwork inside of it is awesome looking. Now, the biggest thing to mention with this particular rule book that you're going to want to do is on Monolith's website, you can actually head there and download the abilities, and basically it's a loadout of all the different abilities and icons mentioned in the game in a more condensed and printable fashion. So instead of having to reference all of the abilities through multiple pages with artwork involved, you can get one that's separate, and so that you're not flipping through the rulebook like a madman or madwoman trying to find all of the different abilities and what they mean. Of course, they become more obvious as you go along and become more familiar with the game. Very similar to how Conan would have worked back in the day. But also another really cool thing that they did was they went ahead and they created ability sheets, or character profile sheets basically, that'll give you all of the abilities that are specific to a particular character or miniature you've chosen. So in other words, depending on which characters you bring into the game, you can actually have a quick cheat sheet, reference sheet for that miniature, versus having to find it within a book or even on a large printable template that they have on their site. So either way, you're covered. And that's really, really handy at the very beginning when you're learning, because I find that the list of these abilities and skills is by far the most engrossing part of learning. The rest of it, and actual learning of the system, is really not that bad at all, especially if you're coming from Conan. It's very much the exact same game. So Moving through the actual rulebook itself, I'll just go ahead and flip through a couple of these pages so you can get a rough idea as to the layout of the game. Everything's kind of broken down into letter fashion in different subcategories with their headers above them. And there's artwork kind of mixed in there as well, kind of like that comic book feel. One of the coolest things in the entire game here is this river, and basically the mechanics that go into how this works all come from the original system built in Conan, which I absolutely loved. So again, a lot of this I already know and won't even need to read because it's going to function the exact same way. So the really cool thing is instead of it becoming just a miniature game of choosing exactly which miniature whenever you want to, you actually have to strategize based on resource cubes that you have, based on what you can afford to spend, and you have to gauge this whole river at the same time, and it constantly is changing based on what you're activating. So you're not going to be able to activate Bane multiple times in a row. You're going to have to pay to activate Bane and be smart about how to strategize that. So that's a really cool mechanism, and that's how the game has been built out, and really comes from Conan and was very successful there as well. So now we're going to move into the missions booklet. This missions booklet is also probably just as big as the other one is, and again has some really nice artwork on the front. I'll go ahead and flip to the back page. Yeah, pretty much 60 pages almost. And on the very back of these rulebooks is a really important thing to mention if you're picking this game up, and that is these layouts right here for elevation and stuff like this. You're going to want to reference these whenever you're using a particular board for a particular scenario. This is a really handy thing to look at because it's going to show you specific board game rules for the particular board you're playing on. And this is easily missed as it's on the back of the book, and sometimes you would think that all of the board information should be on the scenario sheet here, like this one for instance, but there's actually additional information for this particular board on the back there. So you want to keep in mind that when you're setting it up. We also have here like the full scenario breakdown, and the rules also state how you can read this. Some of it's intuitive and some of it could have used a little bit of tweaking in terms of understanding how things worked. Like this determines the first player. Very hard to determine whether that's the good guys or the bad guys unless you actually know how to determine that particular icon. And of course there's some icons up here in terms of which of the usable characters you can use, and some of these icons are the ones you'll be referencing on those sheets to find out what they mean. So again, there's a lot of icons to kind of become familiar with, and that's something you're going to have to learn as you go. But again, in terms of what they've actually placed per scenario in this book, everything's laid out nice enough that you're not going to be flipping between multiple pages besides likely that last back page for those game boards. So not too bad there. Next up, we have the dice for Batman Gotham City Chronicles, and they are fantastic looking. And of course, there's different levels to the damage that you'll be dealing or the dice you'll be rolling. So if you're using grenades or rocket launchers, for instance, the black ones will be used, and they're all staged by different colors in terms of how strong they are, the odds of getting a really good hit. So there's a number of dice inside the box, and there's more than what's even in my hand as well. So a good chunk of dice come inside of this one Heroes box core set. Now we're going to take a nice close look at some of these cool item cards within the game. You can see what I meant by the actual dice icons being on there. You'll learn things like this being a reroll and all that kind of stuff. And of course, some of these are the ones you'll be referencing on that reference sheet on the back of the book or online on their site. They have all these icons mentioned in terms of what they mean. But you can see the artwork in every item in the game. These are basically things you can equip on your heroes as you bring them into a particular scenario. And of course, they have costs and weight associated with them because you can only take so much. So there's strategy in deciding what to bring for which scenario and what makes sense. So the more you become familiar with the game, the better you are at choosing these different items to equip with your heroes. And of course, equipping them on the right hero also matters too. So we have all kinds of different things here to choose from. And you can see as you get into the more aggressive weapons here, the dice actually increase, or there's rerolls attached to them. The actual colors are changing on some of them as well. And of course, a bunch of these have full-on icons as well in the mix. You got the bulletproof vest, the shotgun, all kinds of weapons. Wow, a flaming sword with a red, so there you go, red dice, not bad. Orange. Some pretty awesome looking weapons to be sure. There's a sniper rifle. Katana, kryptonite fragment, machine pistol, lockpicking, hacking equipment. All kinds of great items here. Submachine gun, brass knuckles, crossbow, minigun. There you go. I definitely think that would be useful, and the bow itself. So those are all of the mini cards. Within the game, you'll find a handful of red cubes, which are used to denote energy, and you're going to be expending energy to actually take actions and do things within Batman Gotham City Chronicles, whether you are the villain or the heroes. Now, if you're unfamiliar with some of the heroes within Batman, you have them all listed out here to tell you exactly their names, a little bit of a detail in terms of where they come from, if they're an alternate version, say, of Batman, for instance, and also they have their full pictures there as well. And you can see Batcow is actually included in there as well, which is absolutely ridiculous and awesome all at the same time. And there's, of course, a number of different individuals where there's multiples of them, like the SWAT teams or the GCPD or Gotham City Police Department, and bystanders and citizens, of course. So inside the box, here is a handful of the miniatures, and this first tray is definitely the miniatures where there's multiple copies, like citizens or the police department or just bystanders in general, or some even henchmen are, I think, mixed in here as well. But a lot of this looks to me like it's officers and civilians on this top tray. Here's an example of what 2 of the citizen sculpts look like within the game. And here's a look at 5 other miniatures that relate themselves to what appears to be the police department within Gotham City. And then once the first tray has been removed, we now move into the heroes. And there's a whole bunch in here, including Batman himself. He even has one pose, like this one right here, where his feet actually have prongs to be stuck into 2 different bases, depending on which look you'd like to have. So for instance, you could have Batman sitting on top of what appears to be the corner of a building, looking pretty epic indeed. Or instead, you can have Batman standing on top of some rubble. Either way, he looks pretty awesome. You can also choose to play as Batcow, and I'm not kidding at all. And besides Batman, there's also a number of other absolutely awesome looking heroes that you can choose from as well. After the miniatures are dealt with, we now have some foam here that we can remove, which is actually really nice and keeps all this stuff secure and in place, even for when you pack things back up later on. So personally, I wouldn't remove this because it actually keeps things in place quite nicely. And you've got a gigantic thick pile of character boards right here for heroes alone. So I likely won't go through every single one of these, but you can see this is the loadout for each of the characters. And as you can see, all of these icons on here, no one would be familiar with from the beginning of a game. And this is why Monolith has gone ahead and decided to create those character reference sheets so that it's easier to know exactly what all this stuff means on Batman's character card, for instance. Now, this is just one version of Batman. There's also all kinds of other ones that we'll run into in here. We've got Catwoman. It also mentions when we use particular actions that are labeled on the game board behind us, which we'll see in a second, how many dice and what maximum of those dice we can use when using an ability. So all of them are going to be very, very different, and we are going to see duplicates of particular, not duplicates, but duplicates of certain characters in different forms. So we have like Nightwing here, we have the Huntress, Batgirl, Bluebird, Black Canary. There's so many different heroes to go through. It's just insane how much choice you have in this. And again, it does hinge a little bit on the scenario that you choose as to which version you will use. But there are so many different options here. There's a good example of another different Batman that we haven't seen yet. So again, even the abilities change up, right, to focus on that particular style of Batman. So very, very cool. I won't go through every single one of these, but there's all kinds of them. And here's an up-close view of the player board where all of the action and resource management for the miniatures is going to be happening per hero. There's 3 of these in this core box. You can see all the different actions you can do along the outsides. And down at the bottom there, those 3 sections are going to be where you're managing your cubes between them being fatigued or used, exhausted, ready, all kinds of different states, and they move around in there in a really interesting way. And of course, once you put your character board right in the center, all of this ties in nicely. And with the character board actually slotted into the player board, you can see now the dice line up with all the different actions on the left and right. Also, these areas are recessed on the left and right and on the bottom so that the cubes that sit inside of them don't get scattered around. Overall, it looks fantastic. Now we'll take a nice up close look at the 4 different maps that come inside of this core box. There is 2 boards, and both boards have 2 sides for a total of 4. And this is one side of them, and it is a subway map, as you can see. I really like the artistic design of these maps, and I also like the way that the walls, which are really important to denote when you're playing a miniatures game, are kind of on an angle to show depth and to show kind of shadows and everything else, because it gives it that feel of actually having depth or levels to it, even though it's flat as a board, ironically. So there's also little nodes here all over the board, which might be hard to see from where you guys are sitting, but basically there's a circle in the center that's solid, and then there's a circle around the outside that's either fully solid around, or it's kind of dashed, or it's just something else altogether. Like, they change depending on what the elevation levels are like. And really, that's a really great indicator, quickly looking at the board, of what is up high and what is down low. And that's essentially how you can take a look at the board quickly and note whether or not your space you're in is above or below, even if you can't really see, or the depth perception of the board is hard to tell if something's sunken in or not. Like, for instance, down here in the subway section, we all know that the subways would be down below the actual platform that individuals would walk on. So this would be a lower level, but that may not be the actual case, and they might be considered on the exact same level. That's where, going to the back of the reference book, where you can see the game boards, it will actually mention how many levels and what levels are involved in each of these different layouts. This next map is really cool looking. Kind of looks like a dead-end alley, or maybe a side street of some type, or kind of a back area of a warehouse. It just has all kinds of stuff going on here, but in terms of levels and platforms, there's all kinds of them here. So again, this is where referencing that other sheet I mentioned is very important, so that you know the levels of all the different buildings, and down below it, even onto the street level. You've also got trucks and cars and stuff like that you can actually be on top of, which is pretty insane. Here is another map layout, basically looking kind of like an underground sewer area, but it could also be just some random warehouse somewhere. It's really cool looking as well. And again, the lighting on these boards is what really brings them to life. Like, for instance, the computer monitor way over there, or the lighting in this red room, that light really does emanate. It doesn't actually come across on camera as well as it does on the table. It's actually a much darker, and the colors are much richer off camera. It's hard to actually get that on camera with lighting when you're doing a video, but the actual graphics, again, with this particular map, really impressed with. And it wouldn't be a Batman game without at least one scenario that revolves around a bank heist of some sort. And you can see here, you've got the cops all out front, sealing the front exit off, waiting for the criminals to come out. You've got multiple places within this bank to basically hide or move around within. And of course, the vault is even open with the money spilling out on the floor. All these things are extremely thematic. Now let's move on to the villain box for Batman Gotham City Chronicles. Once you remove the lid from the box, you run straight into this dashboard that the villain's going to be controlling. We're going to go ahead and take the wrap off this thing and take a look at it close up. So this is the villain dashboard without anything on it. You can see it's very high quality, has lots of etchings into it. You could definitely do quite a paint job on this one if you wanted to really bring out the color, but it also has some cardboard pieces that will sit in this area here, in these 3 slots, and here, here, and here. So everything starts getting really colorful quickly, plus all the tiles for each miniature group, or individual miniatures like Bane, for instance, who only counts as 1 figure. But you'll be slotting them all across here depending on which scenario you're playing. Say, for instance, you have all 8 slots filled up. If you're going to go ahead and use the villain, you've kind of got your area for your energy cubes and your exhausted area over here, and you'll have a certain amount that you can spend in order to exhaust particular tiles in this river area down here. They all cost different amounts based on where they're sitting in the river. So if you decide to activate this one, it costs 5, you'll move 5 cubes over. This one activates, you do everything you're supposed to do with this particular group of miniatures or individual miniature to activate them, and then this tile goes to the end of the river and everything else shuffles down. So you're kind of always managing your resources in terms of which miniatures you're activating and how much it's going to cost you on the resource side. And up in the left-hand corner here and right-hand corner, you've just got areas for tracking things numerically, and usually this is for health. So you'll have Bane, for instance, his token will go here. If he starts at 5 health, you'll put a tracker right there, and as he gets beat up, he's going to move his tracker down here. It just keeps things all in one place. Very good for organization, plus the fact that this board is recessed keeps things from being bounced around or knocked around. Right after we get past that board, we dive straight into a box of minis. So let's go ahead, open this up, and we'll take a look at a number of them here. But again, similar to the heroes, all of the villains are labeled out here. So if you don't know how many villains of a particular type you should have inside the box, they're all numerically numbered right beside them. If they're groups like Brutes or Riddler's gang, for instance. Of course, if you have things like Harley Quinn or Penguin, it'll tell you if it's kind of a regular version of those particular characters or maybe an alternate version as well. And when you open up the box, you can expect to be greeted by a ton of miniatures. And again, this is similar to the heroes. You're going to have multiples of certain thug groups, basically. So you can see a whole bunch of them right here. I'll bring a couple of them up close into the screen, but you also got these really large, oversized miniatures for some of the really bad, big-time villains in the Batman universe. So here's an example of 4 of them. These are all unique, different sculpts, but of course there can be multiples of these. Some of these pertain to Riddler's gang, and other ones are just thugs from either the jailhouse or just individuals in general you may find running amongst the subway systems. So there's a whole bunch of villains in here, including ones that pertain to even Poison Ivy. It has the plants and everything involved, so it's quite crazy. Penguin's got his thugs as well with some shotguns, which are pretty cool. But now we're going to take a look at some of the really big villains. Now, just before we take a look at those huge miniatures on the right, now that I've removed the clear cover, I want to talk about this right here. There are 4 miniatures in this box that require some gluing, so you're going to have to be ready to have some super glue on hand just to connect the nets to the end of a gun. But basically, there's only 4 miniatures that need that, so everything else is fully assembled. So here's an example of what Clayface looks like. A pretty awesome miniature, one of the bigger ones. Big time sledgehammer for a hand there. Awesome detail all the way around. Looks fantastic. Again, if you're a painter, this is the kind of stuff you're going to love. And here's an up-close look at Bane. This is one of 2 different versions of Bane inside of the game, and they're kind of a staged progression, of course, based on the Batman lore of the universe. We know how Bane operates, but in this particular game, he starts at kind of a stage 1 and then moves to this one, which is stage 2. Looks a lot more threatening, and this one is a really cool sculpt. Would be really awesome to get this thing painted up. And here is Killer Croc. So we got him in a really dynamic pose, kind of full on running at what would likely be Batman. But again, very good details all the way around and certainly will pop with some paint. And as you can see below, there's actually a number of other villains inside of this box that are quite large in stature. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but I wanted to give you the gist of what these look like and the details on them. They do look really good, and I am quite pleased with the sculpts. So coming out of that lower tray below down there, we got the other version of Bane. This is the first version of Bane. This is the first version of Bane you would use if you were playing a particular scenario with him, of course, unless the scenario tells you to start with stage 2, but Bane would start here and then progress to the next one, which is really cool. And then, of course, amongst a ton of other villain miniatures in the box below, which I can't go through every single one, but you got the classics here like Riddler, Harley Quinn, Penguin, Joker. There's alternative sculpts of some of these guys as well, which means the tiles that relate to the actual miniature will change the abilities on the alternative sculpts. So you're not just getting duplicates of the same character, you're also getting different ways to play the same character at the same time. And not all of them have alternative sculpts. Usually it's just the most popular ones. So there's a whole bunch below here, probably about another 20 to 30 miniatures below in that tray. But here's an example of just 4 of them. So you're definitely getting your fill in terms of coverage for villains in this Batman game. And last but certainly not least, you have all of the token sheets sitting at the bottom of the villain box. You got all kinds of different status tokens, objective markers, handcuffs. You got the dashboards that are actually going to track rounds. All that kind of stuff is here, as well as, like I said, you've got these defusing bombs. Of course, in this particular package, you actually get, as part of the Kickstarter production, some actual miniatures that represent some of these ones, like the bombs and the computers, which is cool. So you don't have to use just the tokens. And then if we flip this over to the other side, you're just going to see the back side of all those tokens. Moving right along, we see a whole bunch of enemy tiles. So these are going to represent all the different enemies in the game and all their different effects and statuses. There's so many here to go through, so I'm not going to show all of them on screen, but you can get the gist from what you're seeing here. And of course, there are about 3 or 4 sheets of these things. So this is the first one, and on the back side of each of these sheets, it's actually got kind of a damaged side to it. So when these particular miniatures are destroyed or taken out, they will basically plug up the river and just gum it up, and they can't be activated. So in other words, as they basically don't, because they don't activate, they will always start shuffling their way down to the very bottom left of the river and starting to automatically increase the cost of activating the next miniature in line. So if you have one that happens to die, it may get placed into the river and eventually find its way all the way to the very far left hand side, meaning that position number 1 will never be available again. So because of that, you're gonna have to start paying 2 or more to activate your stuff. So the more things that Batman and his friends can knock out in terms of enemies, the better chances they have, as the villain has to manage their resources better to win. So it's kind of a nice struggle, a nice balance there. And then we've got more and more tokens sheets on the sides here. We have the individual tokens, as I mentioned, that would get slotted into the villain board based on which villain you're using. So Two-Face, the circle gets slotted right in. You can use a red cube to denote his health, that type of thing. So that is the third sheet. And then this one right here, and we actually have even a secondary kind of map tile that allows you to maneuver off the board. I really hope that this was helpful, you guys, in terms of understanding what comes inside of this production. And it really is quite the production. Both of the boxes look absolutely phenomenal. The artwork on these boxes is fantastic. And the gameplay, especially, like I said, if you've played Conan before, you're going to dive into this with no issues, except just learning the actual abilities within the specific characters will be the learning curve for you. Now, if you've never played before, then you'll definitely want to check out some videos online in order to become more accustomed to it. And also check out that solo variant in the BGG file section. It's definitely worth checking out a fan-made solo variant like that, being that it's as popular as it is. So hopefully you found this unboxing useful. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, keep on rolling solo.